We're giving RSGB members a chance to find out more about the candidates for the RSGB Board Director Elections 2023, and this gives them an opportunity, by having a chat with them, to tell you more about them, and also an opportunity for you to find out more about them before you cast your vote. So now we're going to meet Paul Nicholls, and his call sign's Mike 0 Papa Victor November. Hello, Paul.
Hello there, Bob.
Now, the important thing here is just to remind everyone that all the candidates are getting the same questions. So you'll get an equal chance to answer those, and you haven't seen any of these questions beforehand. So the first one is, tell us how you got into amateur radio and what aspects you enjoy, Paul.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Bob. Well, I got into amateur radio, I would say probably about 1977. I was 10 at the time. And my great uncle was an avid shortwave listener, and he's a bit of a genius actually. And I used to go down and see him as my granddad's brother, and he'd show me how to make simple radios. I remember we made a 40-meter transmitter in a bean tin, a CW transmitter, and I had a great uncle who was in the signals in the Second World War, and he taught me Morse code, which I've never forgotten. I was 10 or 11 at the time. I had I think my very first radio was a Canada set number 52, which was an old tank receiver. And I took it apart and made it work. And I used to regularly get thrown across the room by the terrible earthing in the power pack. So yeah, I just got the bug, and Bob, and I was bitten by it, and I've never lost it, you know. So, and then, as I did when I was a kid, I was listening to radios. I got into CB radio. I soon fell out of love with that because of the language and silly antics on it. Went to university, and then sort of came back in. I've never lost the bug, but yeah, came back into it and sat the RAE course in 1981. I remember at the time, I was 14. I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to do an exam. I've got loads of them to come. Stupidly, I think I'd have been a G8, wouldn't I? Never sat the exam, and did it some years later. So that's the potted history.
And what aspects of amateur radio do you enjoy most now?
I really enjoy the social side, to be honest. I'm an active member of a local club, Mars, which is over 90 years old, Midland Amateur Radio Society. I'm not into digital, really. I can't seem to sort of find one. I'm quite old-fashioned in that regard. You'll see, I've got a Heathkit receiver here. I've got a TS520S, an old hybrid model here, 70s model, and a 1960s Trio 500 over on the side. So I love the vintage aspects of radio, I do. Love CW, love phone, like HF, but also like having a bit of a chat with my mates on 2 meters.
Now, it's quite a jump from just being an active radio amateur and enjoying the hobby to wanting to be a board director for the RSGB. So what do you think you could bring to that role? Okay,
well, professionally, I'm a solicitor. I'm qualified as a barrister as well. And I'm on a number of boards anyway, or have been. And I like the practical solution to stuff, really. You can tell from my accent I'm a Brummie. So I like sort of dealing with knotty problems and then sort of finding a practical solution to them, really. It's just like people. So I've been on boards. People tend to think that boards are a bit more difficult than they are. It's just a group of like-minded people trying to find a solution to something, usually. So I think I've got the soft skills to be able to do that. I routinely advise boards as well. So I obviously can't tell you who, but again, professionally, I have to go and advise sort of boards of quoted companies on issues and problems, usually practical problems. So I think I could happily do that, and I think I could probably offer some practical solutions, and where they need some legal advice as well, they'd get the benefit of that too, I think.
Perhaps one of the differences between a commercial board or a business and the RSGB is that you're working with volunteers, so everybody involved basically is a volunteer. And
Well,
there's a lot of volunteers across the society. They deliver very important services. How do you think you would be able to work with them?
well, incredibly, actually, the boards that I work with are usually volunteers. They're professional volunteers. Um, I was the chair of one thing. It's a solicitors' organisation, but I was given the benefit of being able to observe one of the board meetings a couple of weeks back, and bizarrely, it was exactly the same stuff that they were talking about, that the legal people were talking about, and I think I was able to offer some sort of solutions there. So yeah, there aren't really that many differences. It doesn't matter whether you're selling law, spoons, or dealing with radio. You'll find the same issues crop up all the time. And usually, as I say, there's I'd say 80-90% of a common thread really there.
Now, one of the big things that made a difference to the whole world and the amateur radio world recently was COVID. It changed the landscape of
Yeah.
amateur radio because the clubs and the radio amateurs couldn't meet, exams moved online. So how do you see the landscape now? Is it changed forever? Are people adapting to different ways of enjoying amateur radio? And how do you think the clubs are faring?
Yeah, well, well, what we did, I'm just trying to think at Mars. I'd got a paid Zoom account. So what we did, we actually moved on to Zoom. In fact, everybody used my account, and we just carried on meeting as normal. In fact, it was great because we actually got quite a few more members joining, and our Facebook account became very active as well. I think there's 200 or 300 members on there. I think people are coming back, and I think they're coming back slowly. I think it's a hybrid now because I know our club met just last week again on online, but some people like the face to face. I think, Bob, the older members, this is what I've observed. They fall into two camps. They're either terrified about coming back because they're anxious about mixing with people. Alternatively, they're absolutely blooming bored stiff, and they're desperate to come back and meet with people. So I think, yeah, just like the corporate world, really, people are drifting back, and they've largely drifted back. But there's also the offering of the digital world as well that's there.
And do you think the RSGB has an important role to play in this new landscape? Because it is a different landscape now.
Yeah, I think so. I think the RSGB, I mean, look, talking from my own perspective, I get Radcom, and, I like looking at, the stuff that's for sale and reviews and things like that, and some of the bits and pieces that people are doing. That's fine. But I'd like to see the RSGB probably, what's the word I'm looking for? Probably interface a little better or a little more with the clubs, to be honest. That's not any criticism, not really at all, but I think that's something I'd like to speak to. If I was a board member, I'd like to look at that aspect really, because people I think seem to think the RSGB is over there somewhere. Well, it's not, is it? The RSGB is a great organisation. It's been around for over 100 years. I just think it's a jigsaw piece that needs to be put back in somewhere.
Now, here's an interesting one that has provoked a lot of discussion, I think, in recent years. I mean, not just recently, but over the last few years, that amateur radio can be seen as a hobby for older white men. So how do you think the RSGB and the amateur radio community as a whole could change that and encourage people from different groups to see it not only as something that they would enjoy, but that they feel they would fit in and they'd be, and this is important, made welcome?
Well, again, I'll talk from my club perspective. So we had a lady called Debbie last Wednesday who passed her her first stage of the exams, taken her 3 times. She's and it's something I want to talk to the RSGB about. Actually, she really struggled because she's got special needs. She's dyslexic, and she really struggled. The reason, she's a clever lady, but when she actually sat her exams, she found the text and everything else ever so difficult. So that's not a middle-aged man, is it? And then my assistant, a lady I've worked with for 30 years, Mandy, she lost her husband 2 or 3 years back. And for the last, I don't know, couple of years, I've been saying to her, I think amateur radio would be really good for you. This Wednesday, she's coming to the club. So how can it change? I think people need to start talking a bit more about it to the people around them. It's as simple as that, really. And then Debbie was talking about, with the fact she wanted to talk to kids. She was saying, I can't understand why we haven't got an amateur radio class at the school and stuff. Oh, great. Well, the reason there isn't one, Deb, is you're the only one who's there. So it's what it is. Do you know what? It's all about enthusiasm, isn't it? 10 years back, my mate and I, Steve, M0SSV, and I joined Mars, maybe a bit longer ago than that. And with all due respect, and a lovely club, but they were mainly sitting around talking about caravans and Land Rovers and things. So we said, look, can we do something? We were both, I think we'd both got our foundation licenses. Can we have a look at the intermediate? Sure. So we started doing it, and then more and more people found out about it. We were talking online, and we've had a really good stable of people come through and do their exams. It's just people talking about it, Bob. The problem with something that never happens is somebody always expects somebody else to do it, or somebody else never does it. So all you need to do is start talking about it, and you'll find that there are people, that can reach other sectors of the community that you can't. We've got a rabbi that comes to our place, a guy called Moishe. He's got the top hat and the sort of the ringlets and the big beard and all the rest of it. He's a fantastic bloke. I can't talk to his sector of the community because they don't know me. He can. So it's as simple as that, I think. It's not rocket science, is it?
And you've touched there on where I was going with the next question, really, which is how important you feel it is for the society to develop links with external organisations. In which areas can we develop those links? Who with? And how can we do that?
Well, there's loads of people, isn't there? So the guys that I mix with, some of them are High Court judges, some of them are barristers and solicitors. You're not going to be able to speak to them. Some of my clients are homeless. Do you know what I mean? But then, just like I've said, Moishe is in the Jewish community. I've got an uncle who's blind down in London. He's absolutely desperate to get onto the radio. So I'm looking at local clubs down in Essex for him, and sort of white stick organisations. It's just about joining the dots, really. And the thing is, if I don't know the people to send them to, somebody at the RSGB or somebody else will. So I think it's all about getting the conversation started, really.
And the other conversation that has been going on is whether the RSGB should be encouraging more youngsters into amateur radio, because people say, oh, they're the future, we need more youngsters, or should we stay focused on marketing amateur radio to the age groups that have a bit more time? We've talked about, I think, your experience. You have other stuff going on in your life, and then that space becomes available perhaps when you're a little bit older, perhaps a bit more disposable income. So who should we be focusing on?
Everybody. Why would you simply say we'll divert all our attention to 14 to 18-year-olds? The fact of the matter is, my Uncle Mark is now retired. He's sitting down in Essex and he hasn't got that much to do. So he's a prime candidate. But by the same token, Deb, who I talked to you about 5-10 minutes ago, is saying that she thinks that the school kids would be really interested. I think what we do is we talk to people about their affinity groups. So I think it's probably a little bit of a red herring to say I think we should only focus here. I think you should focus everywhere. I think you should get the conversation going with as many people as you can. Have a brainstorming session with the guys online or your members at your club, and you'll be surprised.
We've seen a lot of changes. You mentioned digital stuff and your particular interest, but there have been a lot of technological changes in amateur radio as well as the social changes that we talked about earlier. So what do you see as the vision for amateur radio over the next few years? How do you think it will develop, maybe over the next 5 years, let's say? Okay.
Well, my 31-year-old amateur radio leaves him cold. He says, why don't you just go on Skype and speak to strangers? It doesn't get it. You know what I mean? But then we've got, there was another youngster who started, he must be in his early mid-20s. what I think, sorry, the technologies. Well, the funny thing is, it's a bit of an irony. This is, isn't it? Because on Facebook at the moment, I've seen a really big growth in people really loving vintage amateur radio. Okay, so guys are now looking for, the old RA18s or the Canada set number 52s or whatever, or, they're experiencing hybrids. And it's, the thing is, I can understand why people want to speak to the ISS. I'm not interested in that. But I really love the fact that, I might get an old FT101 that hasn't worked for ages, take it apart and put it back together again. It starts working again. So I don't necessarily think it's, I think with social media, I think you've got a whole sort of smorgasbord of stuff. People are now. I've seen a real resurgence in CW, which of course is that's almost like going backwards, isn't it? And people at the club, I sort of said to them, if I bring my Morse code key, anybody interested? They were all absolutely game for it. Brilliant. But then people are bringing in, sort of digital radios and stuff, and they're talking about FT8 and stuff like that. The stuff that I don't understand. So where will it go? I honestly don't think it's going to be. I honestly don't think it's going to be that different unless there's a a real sort of new invention or something. I think it will probably pretty much carry on the way it is. And I think, as I say, bizarrely, people will be looking backwards at wanting to get the old hybrid stuff out and learning Morse and all the rest of it. That's my honest thoughts.
Yep, so it's not all about moving forward technologically. It's about perhaps people broadening their interests and getting information to them about that. In 2017, the Society launched its strategy for the years up to 2022. So we've passed that milestone. So what areas do you think the Society should be focusing its time and resources? Because the resources aren't huge, they've got to be focused, I suppose. Yeah. So over the next 2 to 3 years, where should the focus be for the RSGB?
I think one of the biggest, the biggest explosion that we've had in recent years, in fact, I think 2007 was supposed to have been the key year, is social media. And I think the RSGB should perhaps really be looking to do something rather more old-fashioned, and that's more about engaging and about getting the clubs up and running. And when I was listening to the board meeting, I just had something go through my mind about the RSGB perhaps, or the regional coordinators or whatever, putting packs together so that, when people do meet, they're not talking about caravans or whatever, or having a chat about the daffodils. It is about looking at how an old hybrid radio works, or looking at FT8, or having a slideshow on the digital advances, or having a demonstration. I think I remember I remember taking this, which was my foray into digital radio, and I remember saying, no, it wasn't this, I beg your pardon, it was a DMR radio, and sitting upstairs in South Birmingham. So let's see who we can get, shall we? And the first person was somebody coming into the club about 1.5 miles down the road. The second one was a chap sitting on a bench looking at the Statue of Liberty. And the third one was a guy waiting on the South Island in New Zealand, waiting for a bus. It was unbelievable. So do you know what I mean? Things like that get people talking, don't they? So I think I would probably be looking at engagement and more about social media and more about getting the conversation started. Something rather more old-fashioned, than anything else, really. That's me.
Paul, thank you very much for chatting.
My pleasure, Bob. Lovely to speak to you.
Great to find out more about you as a candidate for the RSGB Board Director Candidate Elections 2023.